So I want to welcome Bil Herd. Came out here in a much
convoluted
itinerary. He was originally scheduled to fly in, I guess, 2 nights ago.
Well, I flew through here. Yeah, I was supposed to be here 2 nights ago, and I was here. It's just I was going somewhere else at the time.
Right, and he mistakenly thought that our little festival here was next weekend and not this weekend. So,
which is entirely due to being burned out.
Thanks to Mr. Baugh, we got everything straightened out, and Bill's here to join us today. Early engineer at Commodore, and currently a writer for Hackaday.
Yes.
Anything else?
That's it.
All right.
Survivor.
So turn it over to Bill.
Yeah, as he said, I'm Bil Herd, and I call myself a surviving Commodore, or a recovering Commodore engineer. There you go. And it really does take a toll. I really am a burnout. As I mentioned, to even get here, I get a text. Earlier this week, I was at the Computer History Museum in Sunnyvale, California. And we're there showing the 8-bit generation movie, which I ended up narrating, which I never done anything like that before. And it turned out to be a real nice event. We had like Chuck Peddle there, and I'll talk about a little bit who he was and stuff. And so I'm coming back from that event. I get home, I fly through Atlanta Friday night, Thursday night, get home, go to bed, wake up, and I get a text message saying, on my way to pick you up. And I texted back, you have the wrong number. Who are you, right? And it's, they're waiting to pick me up. I've completely screwed up the weeks and stuff, and that's, I do blame that on having worked at Commodore 30 years ago, just at a level of burnout. But I was able to hook up, get another flight, so here we are, and thank you for having me. This is a great, VCF, normal VCF has stage envy. I can tell you that right now. This is a nice looking stage. So how many here remember Commodore or know who Commodore was? See, that's unusual these days. It used to be I'd go, do you remember Commodore? And after a while I was going, well, did your parents have a Commodore? Now I just don't say the word. Because nobody really does. Apple won, right? Fierce competitors. I get that from Jack Tramiel. But I'll admit, they won. They're still around, and we're not. So not many people do remember the Commodore or the old Commodore days. But we're still pretty defensive, too. But like, nah, we had the best chips. They were just using our chips, right? So, but I refer to Commodore as a Greek tragedy in 3 acts, right? And I'm from Act 2. Okay, so I'm right dead in the center of this thing. And I'll talk a little bit about the first act, though. When I got there, we didn't stop and ask who came before us. Why is that cigar burning in the ashtray? The chair's still warm, right? And that's from when Chuck Peddle and the guys that did the 6502 had left. And we're like, we could tell, greatness had sat in this room, but we didn't know much more about it. Because we're young, we're full of testosterone, and we got work to do. So we just kind of jumped right in and went at it without getting the history. And I wish I had now, found out more. But having just spent time with like Chuck Peddle this week and some of the other guys, I did get a lot more of the history than I thought I knew. So and I was also with Leonard Tramiel. As you may know, Jack Tramiel passed away a couple years ago. But his son Leonard's pretty active now, kind of in his stead out there. And so he was at the event at the Computer History Museum. That video, by the way, is playing, where's it playing? Okay, and it's in a continuous loop. So that's courtesy of Bruno Grandpa, who is the producer of the video that we could show that here this weekend to show you and they have Wozniak and they have all the people you'd expect to be in there and then some cool people too, right? So the way I got hired at Commodore, I almost blew it. I tell people I was extremely lucky. It was pure luck that I even never got in there. But, staying there was kind of, then that's who you were, whether you could handle it or not. But at Commodore, they had moved from the West Coast to the East Coast, supposedly because the engineers were cheaper. Enter me. I was making $18K at the time when I walked in the door. Got a raise to 24. But I go to interview with a guy named Bob Russell, who had worked on the VIC-20 and some other things. And, the guy before him, I blew it. I was trying too hard to be liked. I'm like, oh yeah, technology, really cool. And the guy's like having none of it. So I get in with Bob Russell, and I'm blowing that interview as well. And Bob says something like, he said, well, if you load X immediate 05, and I go, I'm like A502. And he looks at me and he says another opcode, or he says another mnemonic, and I say the opcode back to him, because I know him cold from where I worked. And that's when his body language shifted. And he said, come on down, we'll have you, I want to have you down to show you some stuff. So I got through that part of the interview process. And what I didn't know was that I was supposed to bring a resume. I'm being re-interviewed. He didn't say that part. So I get there and I blow that interview also. And then at the last minute, the first guy that hadn't liked me started to like me. And it just worked out. So it ended up pretty cool. So my second week there, we are in the chip lab where they have a microscope. And they're working on a chip that I'll talk about more called the TED chip. But they had it under the microscope because they had made a mistake. They'd made several. But back then, we had design rule checks. When you lay out a chip, I mean, they used to cut ruby lith on tables. They'd kick their shoes off and get as far up on there and use photomask to do all this. So they had finally started doing it with a system called the CALMA, where they laid the polygons and stuff. And these people would dream polygons in their sleep. They'd get wired. And it would tell the design rule check as if two of these got too close to each other, pictured almost like a PC board for chips. But if it cut right across it, it's fine. There was no electrical rule check that said you just shorted A10 to A11, A12, and A13. So we made a chip as Rev 1 or 2. And it had shorted. You couldn't talk to the registers because the lines were shorted out. So I'm in this room, and I hear the guy go, all right, turn on the microscope light. Okay, turn it off. Good, we're in NTSC mode. I look over, I'm like, did you just flood the cell with the light from the microscope and change the state of the register? And he goes, yeah, huh? I'm like, oh, I am in the right place. This is where I want to work, right? The things I'd only heard about, chip wafers. These things, right? I saw pictures. Pretty soon we're flinging them at each other. I started it, but flinging it like frisbees at each other, doing that kind of stuff. I thought, somebody had told me, because they pick on the new guys maybe, that you could cleave one of those wafers. There's an edge that's flat on one side, tells you the orientation of the crystals. If you laid it on the edge of your desk and hit it just right with that parallel to the edge, it would cleave into like 5 or 6 clean pieces. I did that, and I was shaking glass out of my hair for 3 or 4 hours. It just shattered like this, right? And of course, the way you cleave a wafer is you take an ink pen point and just hit it, and it just does it. So, but a lot of cool things going on back then. And I remembered my first, we have a secret in that the Commodore 64 didn't really work. May not be a secret to everybody, right? Especially if you had bought one. But we had a lot of trouble making the chips that we are so proud of. Around my second week there also, my boss at the time, Shiraz Shivji, said, I need you to go down and make a deal with MOS. We're on the second floor, they're on the bottom floor. So going down meant to the chip guys. I get down there, and I've got a little HP calculator that you had to squint to see the characters, and you had to twist it and see if the characters changed. If it did, you weren't done twisting it yet, and if it stopped, then you could read the number. And the battery's good for 10 minutes by this time, old crummy battery. So I get down there, and they're gang piling on me, 3 guys. I ended up being good friends with them. But they're hitting me with, well, if we change the RAS on the DRAM 10 nanoseconds, we can do this. And I'm busy typing away, and I'm like, all new stuff to me, but I'd studied the design. And I'm banging away on this thing, and my calculator dies. So I keep acting like it's working. I notice something. When I say, oh, if we do it this, the guy'd go like this. So I've said, or we could relax it, and he'd go, and watch his body language. He's playing poker. I'm playing with my calculator. He's playing poker with me, right? So they're after something. And I ask, what are you after? I put the calculator down. I said, what's going on? What do you need? Just tell me. They said, well, we blew it. We fire trucked up, and this was, okay, I can live with that if you can live with this, really? And so we made a deal, right? And so that's where I learned to get along with the MOS engineers, who were great, because we could mess things up more ways than you could count. So it was a lot of what we did were putting out fires. And so having those guys, they would actually go into a chip run, and it's called a shmoo. We'd say, hey, pull out the ones that do this. It might work better, and they would. They'd get us a batch of chips that would do that. By the way, when we run a batch of chips, that was between $120,000 and $250,000 of $1980. We didn't care. We called it dirty sand, right? As long as we got what we needed. So has anybody had an old Commodore 64? Do you ever see the sparkle? Is anybody familiar with the sparkle? Wow, okay. In the early days, they sparkled. You knew it. And like I said, the DRAM timings, dynamic random access memory, did not work. Okay, it appeared to work. Worked long enough for you to get it under your Christmas tree. And if it failed, it would only run 10 minutes and then reset. Well, we'll get you another one in January, but the main thing was we'd get it under your Christmas tree. So one of the things that was because these timings didn't work, the Commodore 64 would have, its main screen was light blue on dark blue. Well, you get the light blue sparkles everywhere. I mean, they were horrible, right? So we had to find ways to deal with that and still, if we changed the chip, we might break something else, right? And the DRAMs, production's doing things like soldering capacitors right on the control lines, which is just a no-no, right? So later, I ended up drinking beer with the head of production. I said, let us in, we can help you. Because we'd actually, if an engineer went downstairs, the security guards would escort you out. It was that kind of environment. So one of the things they did a Tiger team, right, to fix the VIC problems. These guys all got pretty good bonuses. Benny Pruden was one of them. They changed the foreground color in the part of the screen that wasn't being used to the same color as the background color. So now instead of light blue on dark blue, it's dark blue on dark blue. Still flickers. You just can't see it because it's the same color going on and over and over itself. If you looked in a cell, you could see it, but there's a character there, and your eyes would say, the character. So those are the kind of things we were doing to make the chip work. Now, when one of the revs came out then, so I'll be moving into the hardware lab here as I talk. But one of the, when we came out with a new rev of the VIC chip, everybody liked it so much that they were stealing them. Even though you worked at Commodore, people had Commodore 64s at home, and we had something in the bench that had like the newest rev. I thought it was Rev 7. Somebody said, I might be mistaken, maybe I mean Rev 9, so that's possible. But you'd go to lunch, you'd come back, and they'd carefully pried out the good chip and put their bad one from home in it, right? And if you're lucky, they'd turn the power off first. So that kept going on. You'd find the Commodore 64 in your office torn open, and this time they didn't turn the power off or leave a chip. So what I did is I sent down to the basement and said, send me up to the basement. And I sent downstairs, and I said, send me up a couple tubes. And I put them on the desk and put a sign that said, take one. And so all theft in the Commodore hardware lab stopped overnight, literally. So it was, so the kind of the point of all that was it had been a very competitive environment. We would make a computer and ship it over to Commodore Japan, and they would remake the computer, right? Because they knew how to make it for mass production. But then we'd end up with problems that we might have been able to prevent or didn't know anything about, and so we'd get into the cycle. And of course, there's a lot of blaming going on back and forth and stuff. So as we got into some of the computers I tried to break that cycle to where we did it once straight through. So has anybody heard of the TED series? Do you know what a TED is? What's a TED? Text display. And TED is the name for what y'all call a +4 these days. Actually, we called it that, and we're sorry we did. When I first got to Commodore, Jack Terminal was still in charge. He was still running the place. And he thought things through and knew that his next computer should not compete with the Commodore 64. So the TED, and this is one of you may have seen this. This is the 70, this was supposed to cost $79, and this little sucker here was supposed to cost $49. And this was the answer to the Timex Sinclair, the color Sinclair, Spectrum, Sinclair Spectrum, I think it was called, right? Yeah, chiclet keyboards, right? And as a matter of fact, my boss, when he went to show me, I'd been picked to run the project because I'd wandered off into the hardware lab, and I looked at the design. I'm like, "Oh, are you jumping on and off the bus during the vertical or during the phi low time to get the graphics processor or time?" The guy goes, "Yeah." Well, it turns out he's leaving in 2 weeks, and he needed to pick somebody to take his place. I literally got shoveled into it. So Shiraz reaches in his Commodore brand horizontal file cabinet, because we made office furniture too, and it was really deadly stuff. You could hurt yourself with this stuff. And he grabs out a Timex, or Sinclair. You'll hear me, I still use old names sometimes because the whole burnout thing. And he said, "This is what we're doing." And so that became this machine. This is a really cool, I actually have a video on YouTube about the C116. In spite of the chiclet keyboards and stuff, this was a cool little box, in my opinion. If you look, there's not a bit of space around the edge that it isn't used. There was a joystick. We didn't use the Atari joystick ports anymore. They just simply wouldn't fit. Everybody hated us for it. We went to DINs. But $49, and you could do some stuff with it. $79, and you had 121 colors. It was supposed to be 128, but it turns out 8 shades of black is still black. So it's 100, one shade of black, 121 colors. Some sound, but not a SID chip. We're not competing with the Commodore 64. This is a business picture, but $79 back in the day when you could just type in an editor or something. So this was a Jack Tramiel thought out thing. I doubt that there's a picture of a 364. Go back one. I'll try and point to it if there is one. Go down. Nope. Nope. Actually, if you, I don't have a good way to send you to it. There's a picture of Jack Tramiel holding one. But a 364 was one of these that had the additional number pad on the side, and it talked, right? It talked. Well, we got the guys from TI Speak and Spell. I mean, that was in the late 70s, 80s, that was it. That was technology. It talked, right? You saw the movie E.T. There's a whole segment on the Speak and Spell. Well, we stole the guys, so they worked at Commodore Texas. And we actually had a program called Magic Desk, and then worked with Magic Voice. So we were trying to get into that desktop theme. You could say delete file, and it would delete the wrong file, that kind of thing. But it was kind of cool, but it was thought out. It was, from Jack Tramiel. And then Jack left at that CES show. And they tried out various excuses on us why Jack Tramiel was no longer running the company. That was pretty, well, he wanted to put his sons in special places. We didn't buy that. The ones that were already, and the ones that didn't want to be, I mean, Leonard wanted to be an astrophysicist. He didn't want to work here. So then they trotted out, well, he got us to 10 billion. He got us to 1 billion, but he can't get us to 10 billion. Well, that's kind of ridiculous. So he tried all these reasons, but at the end of the day, and Leonard was the first person to tell me this, and I couldn't tell anybody literally until after Jack passed away. Then Leonard kind of said, it's okay now. But he argued with Irving Gould. Irving, who was the chairman, who had funded early Commodore when Jack needed some money, was using like the pet jet for his own private vehicle. Oh, we had a jet. We called it the pet jet, right? Because we had a pet computer. He was using it as his own private piggy bank, and that was against Jack Tramiel's work ethic. I mean, if you were ever in the cafeteria with Jack, he'd pay for his own dinner and his guest and that kind of thing. So he had a work ethic that you don't take from the company, and that's why they ended up not getting along. And that happened at a CES show where we were showing the whole TED series. And so suddenly now no Jack, right? We feel the void. Meanwhile, I'm now working on an LCD computer that has never seen the light of day. I don't even think there's go to CommodoreLCD.com. Let's see if it's still up. Okay, that's actually mine. I recognize it. There's 30-year-old Scotch tape on here, 35-year-old. I don't dare strip it off, right? The plastic will probably. But this is what I was working on after the TED series, and this was really cool. These keys are very shallow, but they're beveled, and so they look like there's a lot of travel to them. And Mitsumi made this for us especially. We had bought an LCD company called Eagle Picture. It's like buying a chip company, right? We had our own glass. We were the only American manufacturer of LCD at that time. So this would have been revolutionary, I think. Not quite evolutionary, but you know, not a Commodore 64. You know, something new. So I was working on the architecture of this, and I'd put an MMU in it, a memory management unit. And the guy that we hired to work with me, who knew a lot about modems, he designed our 1200 baud modem, and this had a modem built in, had a bar graph for you, all kinds of cool stuff. Battery powered, you know, first for those times. This at a time when the consultant showed up with an Osborne, right, doing this and banging his ankles. So turns out Jeff, who went on to become the vice president of Commodore Engineering at some point, in other words, very capable, he took this project over. And what had happened to me in the background was I had been sitting in the lab, and I'm sitting there working at one of my logic analyzers, and I keep hearing cursing coming from behind me. I keep hearing this guy going, "I don't understand." So as I listen in, because I'm getting harder to do my work, he's doing a logic analysis, you know, where you start the processor and watch it, and then we'd get to an instruction and it would go bang, bang, bang. It'd say 3 things happened during that time, but that's a lie. It can't. Well, I know what that is. That means that 2 outputs are colliding and the ground is going, you know, everything's going to heck because you've shorted a couple things together, and the logic analyzer just, you know, tries to report that. So finally I turn around, I say, "You've got a shorted output somewhere. Let me see your PLA terms." He had photocopied them crooked, and a whole column was missing, but I could kind of see. I said, "See, you're supposed to have a 1 here instead of a 0 there. Now shut up." Fred Bowen was the other guy sitting there, and Fred lowered his glasses and looked at me. I'm like, a week later, we were doing something called the 128. And about 2 days after that, we said, we weren't calling it the C128. We said we should kind of make it Commodore 64 compatible. And nobody stopped us because nobody knew what we were doing. Jack's gone, right? So we're just a couple engineers, and we know that we want to show something at CES. There's a void coming. And this is 5 months till CES, so this is August or something like that this all this all happens. By the way, PLAs. Do anybody remember the quality issues with the PLAs? If I say that, do you know what was wrong with them? They were dying left and right when I got there. You put them under a microscope, and I called it the purple creeping crud. We had poor passivation. We weren't sealing the chips right. So you ever wonder why old Commodore chips break a lot? Well, we were having some problems sealing them, among other things. We got too much boron in the passivation, the nitrous oxide passivation, and it was corroding, quite literally. It's 6 months, but we didn't. Well, we cared, but we still got the thing under the Christmas tree. You know, and we'll send you a new PLA, or you can get it repaired or something. So when you hear me talk about the PLA, you know, in that, our history of PLAs was pretty scary. So go back one, if you would, please. So has anybody ever seen one of this LCD computer? You may have seen mine, I think. No? Okay. Yeah, there's 3. And you know, us old engineers, man, we really piss off collectors. Because you'll see me, I throw stuff. I'm not throwing yours, but I throw stuff. One time I threw it while talking, and I just went, "That bother you?" And the whole room's going like this. I would break pins off, you know. But Jeff Porter has 2. And they actually, it turned on for a couple seconds. He hasn't changed the batteries in 30 years. So they're all leaked out inside. He doesn't care. He's not changing the batteries. You know, it worked once. We know that. So we're horrible custodians of this stuff, because to us, we don't know that anybody cares, right? It's all old stuff. So yeah, go ahead and go back if you would. So meanwhile, marketing, with Jack Tramiel gone, two things happen. There's nobody there to execute the marketeers or to otherwise tell them what to do. And the middle managers, because there's no wolf, the sheep start to multiply. We got up to our ears in middle management. I mean, they would literally, you know, if they could show up on your project and urinate on it, they did their job. Now they just felt great, even though now you've got a wet board and you have to clean it off. So, you know, in the end, part of what I did, the challenge was to get it done. You know, making the technology work was only half of it. Getting management to leave me alone long enough, or to leave my guys alone, it was becoming a bigger and bigger problem. So some of the things that happened during this time. The TED series, see, I have one of these at home that says 264 on it still. This is supposed to be the 116, 264, 364 plus 4, you know, right? And then the difference between this one, which is a plus 4, and my 264 is the sticker. That's literally the only difference. And they put that software in there. And I used to joke saying, oh, that horrible built-in software, right? Because they now are charging $299, and the plus 4 refers to like 4 different programs. Well, eventually I heard the guy, you know, that supposedly wrote it went, well, it wasn't that bad a software. I had to go, you know, you're right, I've never used it. You know, but for the additional $219, there's no software that would have been good enough. So that was a marketing decision. They put this squarely in the Commodore 64's price area, even a little higher, because they're only used to the Commodore 64. They didn't know another model for distribution. Jack had been working on cutting out distribution altogether. Instead of making 30%, he was giving them 5%. That's actually in the Growing the 8-Bit Generation movie. So meanwhile, marketing goes bonkers, right? They love the Commodore 64. That's where they got their bonuses from. And eventually, things like this start to happen. Does this look like a Commodore 64? Yes, it is a TED still, right? They instructed Japan to put it in this case, and now they can sell a Commodore 64 again. So this is the kind of insanity that was happening. We had a C16, we had a C232. Oh, there's more numbers than I can think of. So back to then jumping ahead to the 128. So the 128 was what I say is the last time where an engineer, at least in our area, could take a schematic off his desk and go to production with it. You know, because after that it became groups of engineers and focus groups and all that kind of stuff. But the 128 started on a piece of paper on my desk, and it was everything we could think of. I mean, nobody was stopping us. Very few knew what we were doing. And so we were piling in as many things as we could, and we said, look, we just went to a CES show for the TED series where developers are going, you know, I spent 7 months working on a program for the VIC-20 or 64, educational program or something. It doesn't run on your new machine. That scares me. Why should I support you? And I heard that. That scared me too a little bit. So we saw putting a 64 mode in there as a way to I mean, sure, it helped the machine. You might as well be compatible with the biggest software base on the planet. It's the way we looked at it. It's like having a big brother on the football team. Sure, I'm going to, you know, drop his name when I can. But it also meant that the developers, that this machine, if it sold, was still a hit for the developers, and maybe they would write for the new modes, maybe they wouldn't. I didn't care if they did or not. Our job was to kind of put as many goodies in the basket as we could, you know. I've called the 128, you've heard the joke about 10 pounds of crap in a 5-pound bag. Well, I call the C128 9 pounds of crap because I couldn't quite get 10 to fit, right? So we shoved everything in there we could. We put the 80 column chip in there, which almost sunk the entire project because I had not asked some basic questions. They made the 80 column chip for the Z8000. You know, Commodore did try and get into 16-bit computers earlier with a project called the Z8000. It was doomed from the beginning. I remember the disk drive controller would ask you what sector and track you wanted to write to, and somebody had to explain to them it's not supposed to be an interactive experience like that. So we had some issues there. Well, the Z80 was the same way, or I mean, I'm sorry, the 8563 80 column was the same way. They had done things, one, the timings. I said, are these 6845 timings? To an engineer, that means a whole subset of timings around the clocks. He said yes, he meant I don't know. I should have said, you don't know, so I'm gonna, I missed it. I remember missing it. I remember asking him. So I had to scramble later for that. And he did that to me twice. But there are other things like they would scroll. You could tell it to scroll a certain number of characters. Well, that's cool. Turns out 256 characters. That's only 2.5 lines. So it's not very useful. To him, 256 is a great number, but you're working on an 80-column chip. Why not scroll the whole screen? Why not do 50 80-column lines or something, not 2.5? And then there was another issue with it where it would not tell us when it was done scrolling. We said, hey, chip, why not interrupt me? There is no interrupt for that. Why not? You can simply read the register and tell when it's done. So you've got this thing that makes it so I can do this automatically, yet I have to sit in a loop seeing when you're done. I might as well do it myself. Huh? You're not saving me time if I have to sit here reading the register. What? I said, okay, look. What I did was, we all started doing this. We wouldn't wait for the phone to ring. We would just start answering the phone. I want to see if there's a phone call. We do this at the bar, drive the people nuts that own the bar. And he started to understand what we're doing. It's like the phone ringing would be an interrupt, and he made it so we had to just keep checking the phone. To this day, we'll still be around and somebody will reach over and pick up a phone just to see if there's a phone call coming in. So those were the kind of things we did with the 8563. And ask me offline what a Texan register is. I'll tell you about that. But as we're getting ready to get to the show, the CES show, to show the C128, there's a problem. There's a big problem. The chip, when you talk to it, would hang. It would crash. It would do it every now and then. The newer versions did it more often. It was getting worse. They didn't believe us. We said it is. They didn't believe us. He had said, when I talked with the engineer about it, because it has its own oscillator, its own clock, its own time domain. And then we've got the 16 megahertz, and we've got 14.318, which is 4 times the color burst frequency. So I'm writing to it with something sent to him, and he's going a different rate. And I tell him, here, here's some data, here's some address, good luck, and he crashes. I said, you synchronized it, didn't you? He said, well, no, it'll never be perfect. I said, yeah, I know, but you put like 5 flip-flops in a row and you'll get it to 1 times 10 to the 37th or something. Or, fine for your Commodore things, run a couple weeks. He hadn't done it at all because he couldn't, because statistically it might still fail in 1 times 10 to the 37th. It failed in like 1 times 10 to the 10th or 5th or something like that. And I remember I'm looking at him, I'm going, you got me again. Damn it, I should have asked you the first time. Well, it turns out he noticed that it was worse in the new chips too. So in the chip lab, he's using only old chips. So we went down there, we had pitchforks, torches, the whole thing. And it turns out the way the Z80 programmer had written CPM was he'd gotten an early chip too, and what he would do is keep it cool. He took the popcorn, he had a Mr. Hot Air popcorn popper. He took the cup for the butter in it, called a butter cup, put an ice cube on it and stuck it on the chip. And that's how he got it to keep working. So when we got to the CES show, the new chip had new problems, and he had to rewrite the code. The thing was, he couldn't recompile CPM. He didn't have the Osborne that you drag around, bang your knuckles, and all the other stuff he needed to. Actually, the Osborne wouldn't compile it. He needed a system at home. But what he did then, this is the night of CES. We've set up our $1 million booth. He sat there with a disk sector editor, edited the opcodes on the disk, realizing that they're backwards and that they're checksummed. And he has to use the exact same number of instructions that were there to begin with. And he does this, and it works. And this is just like one of the cool things. That's a Commodore engineer there. That's one of our team that did that. You know, he was a programmer. But he hand-edited CPN the night of the show. And meanwhile, we're running around. We had found that if we were showing a C64 game in color Ultramax mode, we were talking Ultramaxes, that if you turn the voltage down to 475, it'd work better. So, you know, you turn up to 5 volts and the green CPM would work better. So we're running around doing all that stuff. But the thing then, the way we got that clock synchronization to work after everybody had ignored it, was we had a PC board made in 8 hours where I phase locked it. Everybody goes home for the night. There wasn't any problem we didn't fix overnight, by the way, I'll tell you. Managers come in the next day and they want a status report, right? Well, I'm asleep now. So I had 3 signs that I used to put on my office door. You know how on a ride it says you must be at least this tall to ride the ride? Well, mine says, I had 3 signs. One, you must be a manager to wake me up, and it was signed by a manager. The other one is you must be a director or above to wake me up, and I had it signed by a director. And then I had the vice president. You must be a vice president or above to wake me up. You know, so I'd put these on my thing. So they'd wake us up and find out what we did overnight. We had made a phase lock loop, which actually there's a video of me, Jerry Ellsworth, and me and Jerry talking about phase lock loops. It just ran on Hackaday. But what it does is it says, I know you're 16, I know I'm 14. I'm going to make it so at least you stop moving in relation to each other. And those boards cost us $1,000 each, made in 8 hours. You know, this is the 1980s where stuff like that was real tough to do. But that's actually how we made the CS show. This is like 5 days till CES, something like this, and we're just now getting all these things fixed. So that was the kind of things we were doing to make it to this show. Meanwhile, marketing had gone out and said, by the way, it's 100% C64 compatible. Never said that. Why would I say that, right? We just thought, that's a nice challenge. Let's try for that. Then when we get to Las Vegas, I remember the flyers are laying all over the floor in the baggage area, Commodore flyers. And Greg Berlin, who's 6'8", who had done the 1571 hard drives, across the room, but when somebody's 6'8", you can have a conversation even though there's 50 people in between you. I hold up the flyer and it says expandable to 512K. He's smiling, he holds his up. We never said that either. That was a guy named Tony Dow, who was the project manager for the 128, who I had never met, right? So I had to go introduce myself to him, had said that. So when we got back, and you know, we had to do a dog and pony show after the CES event, Marshall Smith, the then president, who supposedly replaced Jack, supposedly came from US Steel, except US Steel denies the fact he ever worked there, so we're not sure where we got this guy. He asked, they're in a dog and pony show, we stood at the back, and he's like, where's the 512K plug-in? And my boss puffs his cigar. Oh, we all know if he did, but we always tell the story that he puffed his cigar and said, in the back. All right, we slipped out. We're already, by the time they find us, we're on a whiteboard figuring out how to make it do 512K. So those were the kind of things we did. Let's see, there's some quick stories that go along with that. Has anybody heard the joystick story? Because we had laid out the PC board, you know, the case, we had a new joystick for the whole TED series, and it was designed. It looked really nice. It's a guy named Ira Valinsky did it, who's since passed away, and the joystick came down to a real thin neck and went into it, and it did look nice. But I remember going, it's going to break. No, it's designed. I'm sure you had to gusset it and stuff, but still, I'm like, you know, when you play a game, you get into it, right? You might even get mad while doing it. So I'm like, it's going to break. No, it won't. So now we're into opinions, right? And that just won't get you. You can't fight opinions. So we let the, by the way, click over on this picture here. If that focuses. That's what I look like back then. I'm the guy with the, you're not allowed to have shorts that short anymore, but with the long hair and the army headband. So here I am in a meeting with my long hair and everything, and I go, you can go back off that now. So, I wait for the attention to change to the other side of the room, and then you hear snap. I'm sliding the joystick, and it's in two pieces, right? Sorry, and I had to work harder than I thought I would to break it, but I still broke it, and that was my point. That was a $40,000 soft tool. I know Jerry knows what I'm talking about here. That was a soft tool. That costs a lot of money to make, but my point was that better to spend $40,000 and risk my job. I was never afraid of losing my job, by the way. They could fire me if they want. I was afraid of not getting done, right? But not getting fired. So, so I broke the joystick to prove a point, and we never broke a joystick after that. So that was a way to get something across. Meanwhile, in the 128, I'll tell you another quick story. We found, because now we had to be Commodore 64 compatible, I had done some improvements on the 64. Well, I had to literally, one by one, take them all out. I had to put glitches back in the line because somebody used the glitches in a cartridge. I had to, at one point, we cleaned the font up. If you see an old Commodore 64, you know how the descenders, the J's and G's are all different. Well, we call that the Atari font because we stole it from an Atari ROM, because Atari used to come to us to have their chips made. And by the way, don't ever do that. Don't rely on your competitor if your competitor is owned by Jack Tramiel. One Christmas we said, yeah, they're coming, Your ROMs will be there by Christmas. We had a picture of Santa Claus with a bag of ROMs, right? And he goes, no, they're not. And they didn't hit their numbers for Christmas because they relied on MOS technology for the ROMs for that. So we had stole the character set from that, though. And one of the things we had done was we had moved like the dots on the I's and the J's and everything and cleaned it up. Well, at one point, somebody comes running up the stairs going, we found another Commodore 60, another compatibility mode. Meanwhile, the QA manager didn't ever help once. What he did was he would get up on a chair at some point during the development cycle and say, it won't work. And so every little thing that went wrong, he goes, see, I told you. So at this point, he's gloating, right? So they bring it in, it's QualiPaint. Everybody know the program QualiPaint? It's kind of a well-known one. And what it would do is it'd go to paint it'd say QualiPaint, and there's our font, and it would go to paint the K red and the O, the O blue or something, and then it would miss the dot on the I, and it'd take 2 minutes to paint the entire screen. And so we found we couldn't even move the dot on the I and be compatible Commodore 64. So that's the kind of things we went through. Meanwhile, the QA manager was put in charge of testing our printers, for example. And he comes into one of these meetings, he said they failed the drop test. Wow, really? It's called the loading dock drop test, the loading dock height. Wow. Well, when we do the second one, he said, no, all three broke. Wow, well, okay, you tested all three. He said, yeah, the parts went everywhere. What? He'd done it without a box around it. And when one shatters, he does a second one. He did all three. Again, these are like $80,000 printers. I picture like the parts coming out under the lab door and stuff into the hallway. It's like, what are they doing in there? So our QA was, if you felt like Commodore's engineering QA left a little to be desired, it did. So how am I on time? Is there anything you guys want to hear about or talk about or have questions why Commodore did stupid stuff? Hole in the wall? Well, you saw what I look like, right? Tom is known for being a little bit rowdy. We had moved to Westchester, and I had got my own room to work in for the 128. And it was fairly new, just been painted and everything. And then the security guards, being the type of security guards they were, very, very concentrated in their focused is what I'm trying to say, would lock my door because the door has a lock. Well, nobody had a key. The contractors hadn't given us one. I doubt they ever did, actually. And so I had to climb up over the ceiling to drop down in. You get that white stuff all over you, it itches, and let myself in. So I put a sign on the door, said, please don't lock the door. There's no key. Next time, it's locked again. I'm getting tired of going up over the ceiling. I left a sign. Please don't leave. Please don't lock this. There's no key. They do it again. They say I punched through the wall in one punch. It was two. one for the inside, one through the outside. But I punched through the wall right next to the door handle so you could reach in and unlock the door. I have work to do. I'm not afraid of getting fired. I'm afraid of not getting done. Security guard had work to do too. He locked it again. I had to put a sign that says, please don't fire truck this door anymore. There's a hole in the wall. I can unlock it, but you still get that white crap all over you, right? But they kept locking the door even after there was a hole in it. It's like we all but took the door off the hinges. So that was one of the holes in the wall. The other one was, I used to, when you work the hours we did, you get kind of tuned, kind of amped up, right? Too much coffee. And some of the things the guys would do was, I'd be carrying a cup of coffee, and he'd fake a punch. And at first, the coffee would go all over me, right? Well, I learned to throw the coffee in the direction of whoever's faking the punch, and they learned to stop doing that real quick. So one time, though, I wasn't carrying coffee, and the guy dropped his shoulder like he was going to punch. And I waited 1.5 steps, I could count it in my head, turned and pushed him really hard. Well, he goes into the wall, breaks a whole hole in the wall, and there's the back of the men's urinals. I've never seen the backs of men's urinals. But of course, here's what I look like, so you can imagine the reputation I'm getting. So meanwhile, the QA manager, by the way, they were trying to get rid of him by this point. They put him in charge of fixing the holes in the walls. So we'd get reports, well, we've got the things, and they're going to do that sticky tape, and then they'll... So we had to listen. It was worse listening to these status reports and the holes in the wall than... So there was one other time where I had to go over the ceiling. And the background for this is there had been thefts. Oh, security guards. Remind me to come back to the first story. Our security guards were in business for themselves. They were very industrious. We admired them. One of the things Commodore did was we would ship to a trailer park on our property. It's not quite legal, I think, but we would call it shipped and then drive it 100 yards and park it. But our numbers showed it shipped. Well, they go to open those trailers later and they're empty. And the security guards we're putting them in the front, they're selling them out the back. And they literally found like 4 trailers that had been sold off. And suddenly we had all new security guards. I think that's where I got the one that kept locking the door. So theft, they would steal the peanuts out of the desk drawers, things like that. So a memo went out that said any theft, any breaking into offices will not be tolerated. And it might as well have said, this means you, Bil Herd, because I was the guy that had the reputation for breaking into his own office, right? Well, meanwhile, we had screwed up. We had made the font ROM for the 128, the version I was telling you about. Actually, what happened was the V had a bar over it when you printed it, so we had a byte missing. And we know that. They found that. Not the QA department didn't find that. They found that when they made the Easter egg. I don't know if you've ever seen it built into the 128, but it says software and the 3 guys, and it says hardware and the couple of guys work for me, and it says link arms don't make them. Well, that's how we found that we needed to change this ROM. And the head of programming stepped in and said, well, no, clearly you're treating this like a hardware piece. Since it's a font ROM, it's software. I demand responsibility. I'm like, here you go. I need it at MOS by Tuesday. Knock yourself out. This is like Wednesday of the week before. And then he would give, oh, it's proceeding nicely, it's proceeding. Come Friday, I break into his office. I get that white crap all over me again because I go up over the ceiling. I steal it out of his desk drawer and I release it to MOS. Sign my name. I don't need his name, do stuff like that. Tuesday, the day it's supposed to be at MOS, we have the meeting, and he goes, yes, it's still under review. And I said, liar. This old guy looking at that young kid with long hair. I said, liar. I mean, that's the worst sin in my book, right? I said, I broke into your office, stole the part Friday, released it to MS. It's already past mask font generation stage. And, that was like, they forgot to fire me, right? But that was, that same manager told Terry Ryan not to put the structured BASIC in BASIC. If you ever were on the 128, you can loop while, do until, all this cool stuff. Well, Terry did that. He wanted that. Terry's a good programmer. He was told not to do it by Julian, who was a bad manager. Remember, Jack's gone. There's nobody to exterminate the sheep. Terry does it anyways. Julian Sopor doesn't realize he's done it. It turns out it's a hit. Terry's job review was, while it turns out that you were right and it was the right thing to do, you nonetheless disobeyed me, you get a 2% raise. So at the end of the day, I was instrumental in getting that manager relieved of his position, but I never got Terry more than his 2% raise. But that's when I say, you know, getting through management was a big part of what we had to do. So I'm kind of out of, I could talk all day, but I don't want to do that. So I was going to say, if anybody has any questions or something, and if we hit stories, I'm going to tell you a story. So watch what you ask. Go ahead.
Were you involved in the U.S. robotics modem for Commodore?
In the what?
U.S. robotics did a modem for Commodore. Were you involved?
No, U.S. robotics. I know that John Fagans, who wrote the really cool screen editor software and everything on the VIC-20 and Commodore 6, I know he went to there and wrote the code for like V32biz and all those high-speed things. So that, I know John Fagans had a connection, but I didn't know of a. So I left in 85 or 86-ish as the company went into this Act 3 of this Greek tragedy where they just spun in circles.
Yeah, because we did a modem just about that time period. It was a tan thing that plugged in to the back of the machine.
Oh, it was a separate modem?
Yeah.
The fastest modem I knew, I think we went to a 9600, but I thought it was ours.
No, this would have been probably 2400 or something.
Yeah. No, yeah. I'm afraid I don't.
Okay, thanks.
I'm from the era when we had just gotten around to 8 bits. We, 7 bits was like enough for any man. But, so, yes. Oh, I thought somebody else. So, well, it's always amazing. Yes, sir.
How do people feel about Jack and his sons?
You knew who you worked for. The core of us, by the way, when I started in R&D, there was a core of like 8 or 10 of us, including the chip designers that were good and did what we did. Later, when there's a department's 50, there's still a core of 8 or 10 of us that did all the work, right? So they grew up around us and still watched us on the inside. And I called it a little big company, because where else could 10 people do the kind of things that were coming out of Commodore? And that core was fiercely loyal to Jack and felt his presence. You spoke of them like when they got instructions, like Schroz would go up the mountain and come down with it written on a PC board or something. And so I'm from that era where I know what it was like to have Jack and not have Jack, and he was extremely missed, because we felt the company start just going all over the road. People were afraid. I think I probably still have a little fear of him today. I don't even know if I'd been around him a lot, I might have even gotten been fired. That kid there, I can't, he may have recognized me doing good. Later when I talked with him at the anniversary, and he shared that he had been a typewriter repairman in the Army. Well, I'd been a teletype repairman in the Army. And suddenly we're talking and we have all these things. That's actually, if you scroll down, this down here is one of where I'm showing him a picture of me with the long hair and he's showing his wife, but we were talking about, what we had in common actually, no college and that kind of thing. There were the things called Jack attacks. I don't know if you were aware of that or heard of that. And in the Growing the 8-Bit video, you'll see where they talk about an entire department gone, like during lunch, and they come in and it's just the secretary keeping her head low, right? They're gone. They're just. And then there was the other kind of Jack attack, where if you messed up and gave an excuse, you were gone. The only person we knew that survived a confrontation with Jack, Bob Russell, was supposed to hand carry a VIC-20 to a show. And one of the guys in marketing said, well, just counter check it. He said, okay, he thought he was doing the right thing. Well, they get there and the VIC-20 doesn't. Now he's, Jack has nothing to put in Jack's hand. And Bob Russell said, yeah, I screwed up and, what I'll do in the future. And he walked out of the office and everybody was like, because he wasn't fired. After that, he had like a golden glow. They called him the Golden Boy. And management was afraid of him. I mean, all he did was survive a Jack. But if he, he'd go like this, you'd think, oh my God, Jack's listening, through him. So no, I've got nothing but respect. And people, I don't know where they get it, where they, oh, horrible, evil, mean guy or something, but nobody gets any points by saying that in front of me. Let's say that. So what's the reputation for Jack on the street, or has it been so long nobody knows, or? Oh, he Iron Fist, yeah. Well, and when they left for Atari, they took a bunch of our stuff with them, and the engineers then, what they didn't take, they threw in the shredder. And the engineers should have known, they're friends of mine, right? But they still should have known that's illegal. And when they got to California, the FBI was waiting for them. They'd crossed state lines, and they padlocked their U-Hauls, basically, right there on the spot. And then all the suing starts. So they're here one week, and the next week I'm literally reading the Wall Street Journal with Doug Wren saying, well, I didn't know we'd get caught so fast or something, only I'm doing it in we all did impressions of each other. And so, no, that's, so then I'll tell you a quick story. At the CES show, and this is a booth that's got Commodore LCDs and Commodore 128s, and those were pretty much things I'd really been head of or really poured myself into. So, in other words, if you went to the booth, you kind of knew who we were. Well, the phone rings. Answer it. Hello. Yeah, I need you to go over to the Atari booth and check out the printer. I need to know what. Hello? What? Who are you? I don't think it's too much to ask. Those were his words. I don't think it's too much to ask, but I need you to go over to. I said, if I go over there, it's not going to be clandestine. I will be noticed. And that's when he lit into me. Do you know who I am and stuff? And I didn't say, clearly you don't know who I am because I can't go over there. We've been told that you go over to the Atari booth, you get fired in general anyways. So I said, fine, I'll go over there. Again, I'm not worried about getting fired. I'm worried about not getting done. I go over there, and there's Jack Trammell. I mean, closer than I've ever been to him, right? So I walk up and say, Mr. Trammell, I used to work for you, so, and he did that Don, Godfather-like nod and stuff, and he said something like, and Sig Hartman, who used to be our head of software, who's now at Atari, arm around, and he leads me off going, no, he's serious about the offer he just made you. It's like, so I just gotten a good job offer. Meanwhile, Tom Brightman, the guy from the Speak and Spell was there. They all clustered around me. Now I'm the center of attraction in the Atari booth because everybody wants to see who Jack's talking to. And as Fred Bowen said, that's just when you reach in and pull the pin on the grenade and call it a good death, because I could have decapped all of Atari. But yeah, I was always sad that nobody survived out of the Atari Amiga era. It's just like they got it. I don't know if it's because they got on each other in a death spiral or what, but they just never made it. Yeah. And 100% would say that he made changes, and a certain percent's not going to like that no matter what. And that would have shocked me too. So yeah, he's funny the way he tells that. There's a video about the C64 anniversary where he's on stage, and he's talking about how his mission had been to sync Atari, and now he's there syncing Atari. I mean, he was funny the way he said it, but it was real introspective too. So it's yeah, and then Leonard Trammell was head of software, and they had some interesting things. We were all trying to do multitasking and that kind of thing. Meanwhile, over at Commodore, the people head of the department had no business. And they came, like the guy that did the PC Juniors claim to fame, and he got so incensed and irate with the respect being shown him was he had a memo out. This is from what my friends I had still work there. It said the next person that calls it the Amiga Junior gets fired. So now we're back to the kind of memos when I worked there when they were trying to fire me for climbing over the ceilings. So, anything else? Anybody you have a favorite one blowing up story? Or in that case, I'm here all day. No, I'll be walking around and taking a look at everything, but I appreciate everybody, your time and attention. And it's just, it's crazy wonderful, and it still blows my mind that anybody remembers the name Commodore to this day, and it was a fun time. I don't think we'll see that kind of thing again. So, and if you get a chance, check out the movie, The 8-Bit Generation. As I said, I got to narrate it, and it was a lot of fun doing that. So thank you very much, everybody.